Dr. Jörg Wuttke, welcome to BRI Dialogues. It's February 27, 2023, and we're very excited to have you with us. We know that you're the Vice President and Chief Representative of BASF China, and also the Vice President of President of European Chamber of Commerce in China. And what better time to talk about all things China and Europe today with you, and having been living in China for 40 years, if I'm correct.
Well, I came for the first time in 1982. I've lived on and off 33 years. Has been quite a ride.
So welcome to BRI Dialogues. Is there a tectonic shift from where you are sitting in light of the recent developments and energy crisis and the Inflation Reduction Act and the movement of industries from Europe to China? Is this something that you see happening, not within the context of just the German multinationals, but the European conglomerates at large?
Well, we never had as much geopolitics as we have today. I mean, just imagine if you're based in Beijing and you have the Americans pulling off very severe semiconductor sanctions on the 7th of October, which have a huge impact on the economy. It's just one of the many problems we have over here. The second, of course, is China's stance on Russia, Ukraine. They're fence-sitting. They just came up with a plan, but at the same time, credibility for them in order to do anything is extremely low. And everybody in Europe that I met in January in Berlin or in Brussels looks at China through the eyes of Ukraine inherently, meaning, you know, when are they going to invade Taiwan? So it's the Taiwan question behind all of that. So it is incredible. And you have increasingly a sense that there is some sort of decoupling actually happening. So the straight line of globalization, everybody benefits, these days unfortunately are gone, and we have to see in which situation we're going to find ourselves in the next years.
Jörg, that's you've basically fielded about 4 or 5 questions that I was going to raise with you, which is wonderful because you've set the pitch beautifully. Let's take the last point you made that is of concern to Ali and I as well, and I'm sure the wider observers, and that is, well, what is Xi Jinping's new model for China? And in that context, I'm referring particularly to the issue of globalization, where was the signature, even for this Chinese president, of their economic strategy. And you suggesting rightly that there are now tensions between China and the global north, for want of a better term. So how is President Xi going to navigate? Does he have a different, I don't want to call it alternative, model for economic growth that then questions this globalization strategy, which has been driving, if you like, international economy for so long?
Well, definitely the president and his team is very much against the so-called Washington consensus. For him, the kind of American Western model of globalization is not anything that he fits his country in there. The president sees China as a leader of the global South. He sees China as the motor of the economic development there, and definitely he sees also that the West is worried, so he puts it, about China's rise, and that's what his assumption is all about. They want to contain China. Now, we could argue about this, but fact is that he has this idea. And at the same time, he comes up with global models. We have the 10th anniversary of BRI in spring this year. At the same time, they're strongly going after self-reliance, autarky, decoupling themselves from the world. So, I mean, it doesn't really fit together. But what it is all about is, at the end of the day, the communist DNA is control to stay in power. And China feels vulnerable, particularly after the incredible scenes we had after COVID-0 was basically shed. So in a way, it's China which is more uncertain than ever. At the same time, they feel very strong. So it's an awkward situation. And we don't actually know what will come out next week on the National People's Congress. The new team will be established, and we have to see how that all shapes up.
But don't you think for this aspiration to be a global power, that the Chinese understood that the precondition for that is economic development at a very rapid pace, right? So So I sense there is this tension between wanting to be seen a global power while removing the scaffolding that the traditionalists would argue would have got China to be a global power. So how is President Xi, is the focus then purely on domestic power relations? Because there is this wider international, the China dream cannot be realized if China is not a global power, at least to be seen to be equivalent to the United States. So how do you see these tensions playing out?
Well, I grew up in a China, so to speak, that was all about the economy, all about growth, all about catching up with the rest of the world. And now being the second largest, even the largest economy in the world. But it has changed. The kind of strong emphasis on politics is something that Xi Jinping brought to the country, like it or not. So we have a situation where business last year was totally puzzled about these zero tolerance policies because it flies in the face of an open economy. And so we launched a book, in September last year, indicating the headline was Ideology Trumps the Economy. We lament that China became less predictable, less reliable, and hence less efficient. So in a way that worries us because we have to count on China's growth because no one else has this kind of potential as China does. But they seem to be content in order to actually forfeit economic growth for the benefit of having ideological strength and more control over the economy. So we enter a totally different China. Gone are the days of Deng Xiaoping and Zhu Rongji. Economy is everything. Now, will they maintain enough growth in order to actually have a strong China, or will they undershoot? That's the big question we have. We have possibly seen that last year China was 2.8 to 3%. Which is for Chinese conditions nearly a recession. And this year we certainly will be much better off. We might get to 5%. But the kind of question mark that we have is like, will China still be able to generate the growth? Will they be able to have the reform needed done in order to get out of this low growth potential? Or will they end up like Japan on a plateau with a little bit of growth, say 3% over the next decades, but definitely that they might be punching below their economic potential?
Jörg, I think today having you is a joy for us. So I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate, and I'm going to just try to challenge some of your thinking and commentary, because this is a rare opportunity for us, for the sake of audience, not out of any malice or anything. You've talked about the fact that Xi Jinping hates, instability and unpredictability in one of your recent interviews. Which world leader would welcome instability, unpredictability in global economy today? Which one of them can manage that, let alone a country with 1.4 billion people?
Well, definitely, it is a showcase everywhere where you have democracy. Democracy, in essence, is unstable, meaning you change governments, you change leaders, and then you go again. You have that also in India, which inherently is always very unstable. But at the same time, they have the strength in order to zigzag through the future, whereas China is like an aircraft carrier that's put there, and basically everything else that doesn't fit into the narrative of China's strong growth will be basically kicked out. That, of course, is a real challenge because China now enters a new phase. They have not only to fight with the COVID post conditions that we have been finding ourselves in, but also the real estate sector is in crisis. We have a China which has a huge debt burden. China tested last year its population to the magnitude of the Iranian GDP, 236 billion US dollars. And then, of course, we have an aging China. So it seems like that maybe we have a situation where China will not fulfill its promise of not only going through the middle income trap, but also being in a position of strong growth, translating in a benefit for the rest of the world. So in a way, we have a new situation, and control for him is definitely more important. We have done this here before with Mao Zedong. That was, of course, an extreme case of control with an extreme case of economic decline. We are not anywhere close, and I don't see us going down this road. But at the same time, it is telling that he is tightening the screws for private enterprises, for example, those that have been the catalyst of change in China, the Jack Ma's of this world, the Robin Lee, the Pony Ma, And they are, of course, demoralized because they don't know their situation. So the question we have for China is like, which way are you going? Will you be back to the good old days of opening up, inclusive with the globalization, or because of your worries about the US and containment and so forth, will you opt for a slower and lower growth model? And it looks like the latter.
But is there not a dichotomy here? Because they're much more open to foreign companies coming in, whether it's financial sector, banks, US banks coming and tapping into global, the savings of the Chinese, even conglomerates like BASF who are going and operating on their own for the very first time with no local partner. Isn't there a tightening at the local level with Alibabas of the world, not wanting to repeat the mistakes of Mark Zuckerberg, who doesn't even show up for a European Council hearing and sends his second in command, and then at the same time opening up to the foreign companies? Is there a pattern there, you reckon?
Well, I guess that the Chinese have gone through three, what I would call Soviet or Russian trauma. First of all, the beginning of the end was Khrushchev criticizing Stalin in 1956. The second, of course, was Gorbachev's ill-conceived perestroika and glasnost strategy. And the third one was the Yeltsin years, where Xi Jinping has seen how basic oligarchs took advantage of this process, got filthy rich, and the rest of the country went down the drain. So in a way, for him, this is no-go zone. It's exactly the opposite what he wants. And he gears his policy towards this aim. And we have seen this very clearly, that China feels better in control if it has less foreign engagement. I mean, again, my company and car industries are doing extremely well. But if you look at the magnitude of things, every year, European Union companies invest in China in between 8 and 9 billion euro. Now, this might sound a lot to many people, but China invests on average every year in the European Union between 11 and 13 billion. So China, since 10 years, is a bigger investor in Europe than we are over here. How is this possible? Well, it's all about acquisitions. And then the fact that it looks like a huge market to us actually is not true. It is a huge economy with a very small accessible market to us. I give you a picture and one data. Last year, China was shipping 6.4 million containers into the European Union, 6.4 million. What did we do? 1.6. So in a way, there's a complete mismatch of size of economy and the market. And that's why I'm going up and down in Brussels, Beijing, and Berlin, and say, you know, I want to have more of that cake. Now in Brussels and Berlin, I get criticized. Oh, you're too much reliant on China. You should get out of China. And I say, basically, are you kidding me? I'm underinvested and underrepresented in China because I can only do 1.6 million containers. And on top of it, my investment into China is as much as we as European Union invest into taxes. Now you tell me if that's dependency.
Yeah, that's a fascinating, Jörg, the way that you're laying these tensions out for us. I was going to raise with you youth unemployment, which I'll do in a minute. But before doing that, this kind of tectonic pressures. So sitting in Beijing, but also making sure that Brussels has your ear, how are you advising the Commission to manage, on the one hand, the Biden's inflation containment bill, and on the other, the recognition that you rightly point to is the need for European Union to, to say, I guess, to reconfigure itself as a Eurasian grouping. What do you tell Brussels?
Well, I tell Brussels that certainly China has a mercantilist approach. Again, they cherry pick. If you take a picture for this one, they find Europe as a wonderful, big, nice buffet, whereas we in the Chinese context are here down to 4 dishes in a soup. So in a way, we are very constrained over here. At the same time, of course, we are torn in Europe by the IRA and by the energy situation that we find ourselves in. So in a way, it is really hard these days as European, particularly in the energy intensive industries, to stay competitive. So what we ask Brussels to do is, first of all, do your homework. We cannot really influence the Chinese leadership. We can only influence ourselves. Just get the domestic market going, just knock down all these barriers that we still have in the system. Just take China as a Sputnik moment and then still engage with China. We cannot wish China away. We cannot contain China. We have to see where we find access points in order to work with them. And then, of course, we have to see where we are politically in a difficult situation. We are dependent on a couple of products. It's not many. It's pharmaceutical precursors, the famous APIs, it's rare earth, it's magnesium, vitamin B1, and so forth, where we actually should really make an effort to find alternative sources that doesn't have to be in Europe. This can be anywhere else with friendly countries. So in a way, just grow up and don't see China as an enemy or as a foe. Just see China as a challenge. The challenge means we have to get better ourselves.
On this point of access point, Jörg, so the Chinese are obviously very keen on promotion of renewable energy. And as you know, they're now more or less market leaders in so many areas that once was Germany's domain, for example. And now, thanks to the invasion of Ukraine, EU is also similarly focused on alternative energy. Do you see this as one of the access points? Because in my conversations with people in China, they really want to use this as part of the soft power strategy, even in BRI, to promote this kind of and they see Europe as a low-hanging fruit in terms of advancing their technologies in this area and get into the European market. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, China cannot compete with the US on energy prices and the availability of energy. Again, this year, we might see energy shortages in the southwest of China. It doesn't rain. There is hardly any wind. So China has to basically lure us with the market size. And again, the market size is big, but what can we access to it? Again, it's the kind of market barriers that we are talking about. And I wish we would be better and bigger engaged in China than we are at this stage. So in a way, what we have to definitely look into is the fact that when it comes to renewables, China has a near monopoly on wind turbines and solar. Both European specialities where China has scaled up, has better production and had subsidies. I mean, we stay away from subsidies in Europe and now we can see what it does to us. Maybe we wake up too late. And then, of course, the big topic is batteries. I mean, China made a very strong push for batteries. Again, they scaled up. We might have BYD with 3 million cars. They export into Europe already. In my own country, Germany, 20% of all EVs are coming from Shanghai, mostly Tesla, but still. And so we have to learn that are we willing to actually engage with China, keep us open, or do we want to replicate everything at a tremendous cost? I worry about this because we are late to the party. And everything that we might want to do to catch up definitely will be expensive, and our leaders have to communicate this. So we have a situation where now people are lamenting about the dependency on the Chinese market. But if you are looking down the road from here 10 years, as we have just killed the internal combustion engine from 2035, it will be battery-driven cars. And guess where they come from? Of course, from China. So Europe is worried about dependence on China, but they do everything in order to increase the dependency on China. So we have to really see, do we want to work with other countries to counter the Chinese monopoly, or do we work with China? I have no answer for this one. I'm always this Ricardo kind of, we should do it where it's best to do and see that we all benefit. And unfortunately, China has been using already the renewables as a weapon by saying they're considering to have an export ban on solar producing equipment, where they actually have nearly 90% plus they might in order to do this only themselves. So we're in a precarious situation, and we have to see, do we grow with them or do we grow against them?
That's fascinating. Now, a lot of European companies went to China way before, WTO was created or anything of that ilk or this trade dispute. Case in point, your own company as BASF went there in 1885. At the time, the two presidents of the United States were Chester Arthur and Grover Cleveland. So what has happened for European companies in this span of time of not capitalizing on many of these things? And what are your views sitting there with IRA and the rest of it, and this long-arm jurisdiction, sanctions and unilateral element, and then the impact of gas shortage and prices of energy in Europe? And when John Podesta comes out and says, the senior clean energy advisor to Joe Biden, and says, we make no apologies for the fact that American taxpayer dollars ought to go to American jobs. How is Europe finding itself in this trade war? And if US is to tap the dollar or even sanctions or, certain technologies, why shouldn't China reciprocate with rare earths or, renewables?
Well, in a way, we're between a rock and a hard place. It's IRA on the one hand, and it's China's self-reliance policy on the other hand. They call it dual circulation. So in a way, it's very hard. I think we have to just, again, see who we can influence the first and foremost the most. It is us, ourselves. We have to get better in education of our kids. We have to get better in science technology. We have to get better in engineering. We became a continent that has been sitting on its laurels for too long and left it out, particularly to the Chinese, to develop themselves. Now, we have to go out and find friends. I think Chancellor Scholz's visit to India was one indicator. Now, India is not an easy partner to reckon with in the first place, but we also have to see how we actually find niches where we as Europeans can survive and do all of this. I mean, the US is a partner. I wouldn't put too much credibility on Podesta. I think he's just doing this for the domestic home front in order to look strong. I think there's enough awareness that we have to do this together. Again, I worry about doing this together against someone, such as China. Now, globalization is a very, very fragile model. As you just mentioned, my own company in 1913, so more than 100 years ago, my company's exposure to China, the percentage of sales to China was 17%. I think we were last year around 15%. So about 100 years ago, we were more exposed to China, dependent on China, than we frankly are today. And that's also something we should watch out, not to sort of say, oh my God, so much percentage comes from China. For the big four, for example, the three German companies for my own, we are standing for 1/3 of European investment into China. So there must be something right about market access and how we do this. But where are all the SMEs? Where are all these 1,800 members that I have? Do they have the same chance? So we should not assume that just because our big German companies have an easy access because they got the right products, we have to really worry about all the others finding China interesting enough to engage and stay engaged. And that's the worry I have since about a year, that these small companies are reluctant and now looking for alternatives elsewhere. China is not as alluring as it used to be anymore, in particular for those small and medium-sized companies.
So are you indicating that there are tensions within European capitals in terms of strategy towards China? That Berlin obviously has got the formula right or less wrong than the others, and in that context, does Brussels really have a strategy? Because as you know, Chinese penetration of European markets, even through BRI, is enormous. Whether you're talking about Greece, talking about Italy, you're talking about Hungary, and so on. Yeah.
I don't think anybody has a strategy, frankly. I mean, the Germans are working on it, and it's not just that between member states you have diverging views on how to deal with China within the country. You have already diverging view about two ministries, more green dominated, having a more value-based and a more aggressive stance, maybe towards China than the chancellor himself. We have to see how that all shapes up. But at the same time, I guess, again, China's strategy, in a way, even though the European Union doesn't have a China strategy in the narrow sense, they have something which I think is really valid. And they came up with this in April 2019. It's called China as a partner, as a competitor, and a systemic rival. And we have to go down this road to see where we can work with China together as a partner, also in the topic like climate change, biodiversity, or looking into terrorism, for example. And then, of course, China's competitor. We should not kid ourselves. Their competitor, not only in their market where we find it difficult to actually compete, they are now increasing the competitor in our own backyard. Again, the whole Chinese EV industry, and they're a competitor on third markets. And how to deal with that if China pops up with subsidies and with political influence, and our European companies cannot match it and lose the job. And then the third one is, of course, systemic rival. I mean, China hates this word, but at the same time, they are. It's capitalism against communism. It's all about what China actually phrases differently. They say, you know, the West is in decline and the East is rising. How much more of a rival situation can you describe?
Jörg, I want to share a headline yesterday with you of one of the prominent newspapers, broadsheet, not Frankfurter Allgemeine, but the FT, that was saying there's a shortage of private jet space for Chinese affluent. Is this really a communist economy? I mean, you know, I know that is 0.01%, but the aspiration, the leading demand for all the global luxury products. And China now is pushing. John Lee was talking and quoting UAE and Saudi Arabia for listing part of Saudi Aramco in Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So they are outbound. Is this contraction part of that, hey, we want to collaborate with you a la carte as United States and hence EU? Or is it just a notion that China remains to be a socialist, communist economy? Because the indicators don't show that in terms of aspiration. I was in Oxford last weekend. 1/3 of students were Chinese. So how do you reconcile this as a trapped and closed economy with these 2-3 headlines versus what is at core?
Well, that's very encouraging to hear that so many Chinese came back to Oxford. I think we might have 3 or 4 British students here in the whole of China, frankly. I mean, it's one way, again, which worries me because we need these people that have their heart in two societies, are the bridge builders of the future. Now, China is a strange animal. It used to be even more stranger. It was Manchester capitalism with the Leninist party structure. And that has been always the case. And China will always put emphasis on control and all of this. We have seen it during the party congress. We have seen it in 2021 when they went after the private entrepreneurs. Again, the trauma of Russia in the 90s was certainly in the back of Xi Jinping's head. He does not want the rich Chinese to control his party or his country. And so there is, of course, an unresolved conflict because these guys are exactly the ones that bring China forward. These are the guys that are risk takers. They are the guys that go to Oxford, send their kids to Oxford, and so forth. China, unfortunately, over the last years, when it comes to the communist nobility, has unfortunately a strain of like, let's do it at home. Let's wear a pin, let's sing Xi Jinping songs and so forth. That's something which is to me alien. I haven't seen this for 20 years. China was always engaging more. Now we have to see how far this goes. I mean, again, China was insulated for 3 years. They were definitely cut off last year. They paid a price for that. We have to see to what extent they can come back in order to engage themselves. We have not enough flights. We don't have enough engagement. Our CEOs are now coming gradually. I hope that the Chinese leadership flies more to Europe because this, with all due respect to today's session, of course, this online doesn't swing the needle. It's better to see the body language of that. And it was a very good thing that Scholz and Michel came over here and Xi Jinping started traveling again. We have wasted more than a year and it has caused massive misunderstandings. And again, we as Europeans are as usual, always between this. And of course, the situation with Putin is not helping. China, I guess, didn't know that he's invading. They didn't expect him not to make any military progress. And it's a weird situation that their partner with whom they share only anti-Americanism is possibly going down the drain. And that worries them because they need Russia as a partner and they don't want Russia, which is not stable. So in a way, for Beijing, they might look to the outside like a juggernaut, like very strong and we do everything. As in essence, China actually is far more fragile than it projects. And we should not take advantage of this. We should acknowledge this and see where we can find common ground in order to help China not to feel threatened in this kind of situation.
That's sage advice if I ever heard it. So I think you're going to have another visitor, President Macron, to come there. So there seems to be more traffic from the European continent over to China. And you're right, that's a good thing. But there was a time that they would come to talk about economics. I get the sense that now they're coming to talk about geopolitics. So from Beijing's perspective, which is better for President Xi Jinping, to be master of geopolitics or to be master of economic relations?
Well, he's a master in geopolitics in many ways. He has the biggest schemes, he has weird names for it, such as Belt and Road, but everybody immediately recognizes this, and he has a knack for projecting power. He has not very well done in economics over the last 2 or 3 years, and we don't know how well he can actually kickstart the economy again, get the sentiment right, have the Chinese people again being optimistic about this. What strikes me here is that this motor of the Chinese economy, the optimism, the can-do attitude of people, has taken a massive hit, and we have to see how they can actually manage this and manage this outside this kind of propaganda material they use, this kind of heavy-handed toolbox. The Chinese people, in essence, are not very political. They are mostly primarily interested in economic growth. That's what they're good at and have proven to be so. So in a way, it's an odd thing that now emphasis is on politics. Again, we don't know where the journey is heading, and we don't know where, for example, Europe will find itself once the war goes on for another year. And the Americans also have to watch out that they don't do steps which might be really challenging. Again, the question on Taiwan: will the Americans honor the one China policy? Will they use salami tactics to get Taiwan to a point where they might assume that there is some sort of semi-near independence? We have elections in Taipei early next year, and that will be a very dicey situation. So we're in a fragile system. So a bit of more traveling, more talking to each other, and even more important, more listening to each other is all we needed. If we get out of this dreadful situation, I don't know. But COVID has certainly contributed to this kind of misperception that we have of each other.
First and foremost, you're more than welcome anytime to London and Durham. So if you make it across, we'd love to have you and sit down with you over a cold beer.
I got the impression that we got invitation to Beijing, actually, Ali.
Or the other way around.
Oh, yeah.
The other way around.
See it with your own eyes.
Absolutely. But I wanted to ask you two questions. One of the challenges and a theme that comes across in our conversation today is that sage advice, as Anush touched on, that you're inviting us, all of us, to think and to be a realist, right? So I want to put a hypothetical question that nobody dares to ask. And it's okay, because when we have a guest like you, in a guarantor and protector of interest of European businesses in China, we have to capitalize on your wisdom. Question number one, as much as everybody may be rooting the other way around, what if Russia wins this war? As crazy as that may sound, where will Europe be? How will it play out economically, geostrategically? Number two, if China comes to make a peace brokerage, as it's being circulated, will China get the credit, and will the United States allow that podium to be taken by Xi Jinping for brokering the peace?
Yeah. Well, I find it difficult to see how Russia can win. Russia has apparently decided to self-inflict wounds which are unimaginable. Now, my wife is Russian, my daughter-in-law is Ukrainian, my father-in-law was a Soviet deputy foreign minister. So we have deep roots in the Russian society and polit circles. I really don't see. I think
I'm saying hypothetically, Jörg, if that happens, what is the scenario and strategy in Europe?
Again, I don't see this happening. I think the end of this will all be that we all lose and nobody wins. But I really, that's a very far away speculation. Russia cannot bridge this gap, and China knows it. China has seen what Russia has done to itself. China has been following the Russian lines of NATO came creeping up closer. It's very, very bad. Now, what happens is that China, Sweden and Finland joined, and NATO weapons are actually killing Russians. I mean, it's like the worst that you wanted to avoid, the worst is happening now. So in a way, the Chinese look at the system, and the whole mechanism of doing this peace initiative is they don't want something similar in their own neighborhood. It's all about AUKUS, the Australian with the British and the Americans, creating a NATO-like organization in the Far East, in Southeast Asia. And that's what they're really worried about. So when you look at the language, actually, it doesn't really resonate with the situation in Ukraine or Russia. It's all about we, China, don't want something similar in 5 to 10 years where we get contained and the West is creeping up with Korea and with Japan and does the same to us. So in a way, they are not out there in order to engage themselves with Putin or Zelensky to bring peace. They cannot. It's impossible. But at the same time, they want to set markers to tell the Americans and the others, don't go down this road because you see what happens. So in a way, China has not enough influence over Putin to make him change his mind. China doesn't have a history of peacemaking. They didn't succeed in South Sudan, not in Syria, not in other places. So it was a gesture. It was something we should keep in mind, but it was also a marker for other countries to realize what China doesn't want in its own backyard. And I think that's the important point.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Russia's, in a sense, inevitable demise as we go forward, beyond military, economically, it's being crushed, that we'll see in the next maybe 2-3 years, puts kind of, fair end to multipolarity, because one of the things that China would have banked on was Russia remaining as a potent nuclear power, if nothing else, right?
Yeah.
And with China, with Russia militarily as well as economically marginalized going forward the next 5 to 10 years, this idea of multipolarity is a mirage. We are back to a bipolar world. All right, the West remains divided, but it's always been, in a sense, divided on core issues. But China doesn't have a plan B.
Well, in the 70s, Helmut Schmidt, our chancellor at that time, once phrased that the Soviet Union is an African state with nuclear weapons, meaning it's an economic dwarf and a military superpower. Now, it might not be the superpower militarily that it used to be, because now they're limping along. They can barely fend off the Ukrainians. So I guess that we will see Russia having massive problems. A very close friend of mine who is a very good expert on China, he's Russian himself, Alexander Gabuev. Sasha said once that Russia runs the risk of becoming a vassal of China. And I guess that he's absolutely right on this one. We see this danger. It breaks my heart. My heart is definitely also with my family in Moscow. But I can see how this damage will undermine the future of Russia, and where will it be? And you can see the kind of lackluster support that Russia finds from India and other countries. They have given up on Russia as a regional power. It is, as you pointed out, diminished local power and not the Soviet Union anymore. So in a way, China will find more space, will find more influence. China will possibly try to get engaged with other countries in a renewed Belt and Road initiative in order to build up the global South connection. And China, the only thing that China has to watch out is that they get Russia stable and secure, so they don't have the problem in the north, because they depend on oil and gas from Russia.
That's very interesting. Now, I want to bring the conversation a little bit about the development of global South and the ambitions of China and pushing with BRI and the pressures on competitiveness in Europe and the shift of some of the biggest investments in history, including your own firm in China. Are European companies only going after that domestic market share that you were referring to, that you have to have more of those containers? Or are they banking on being closer to the Chinese industries who will already or are already in these global South markets by co-investing, increasing their local production and piggy banking on China's inroads on BRI?
Well, we have to see how it shapes up. I mean, of course, we're here for the size of the economy. Again, we have only a very, very small sliver of the market accessible to us. But what we can do and what we actually do experience is China as a fitness club. It is incredibly innovative. It has something where the car industry, for example, has incredible demanding customers. What people in Europe don't see is that actually they drive innovation for us here. Of course, we have basic research in Germany and we have all the development done over here, but that makes all the difference. So I tell you something, the Germans built the car in order to get from A to B. The Chinese built the car to entertain themselves from A to B. It's a totally different concept. It's a computer on wheels. It's a karaoke bar in the city center of Beijing. So we have not only the engineering capability of China, 50% of all global top-end engineering universities are in China. We have customers that actually force us to be faster and more innovative, and it shows in the products. So we have to see China not just as sort of offloading our products and the containers, which we would like to do more. It is we have to be here in order to be relevant as global players in the future, in the car, in the chemical, in the machinery business. So that's something that is very hard for many Europeans to digest because they see themselves as a giver, provider of innovation. As a matter of fact, of course, we do this to some extent. Actually, we depend on China for getting us just smarter and better.
So in that context, then, does the IRA provide this unique opportunity for European Union companies to now strike closer deal partnerships with the Chinese counterparts? Because the way I look at IRA, I see that it's actually an attack on Europe, less so on China.
Totally. I fully agree. I mean, again, if you're in energy intensive industries, if you are in EV business, this Buy American clearly primarily targets Europe because the Chinese find it anyhow difficult to enter the American market by now already. Will the Chinese be a substitute for the Americans? Certainly not, because the size of the market is different, the accessibility is different. Again, we have invested in China as European companies over 20 years to the magnitude of $170 billion. We do this in America in 1 year with $160 billion. So we cannot replace this. At the same time, Americans have declared an attack on our industrial landscape. If you establish a chemical site in Alabama, all of a sudden you do this with a benefit of $100 billion of subsidies or lower prices. So we have to see how we can actually counter that. I understand that Brussels, Paris, and Berlin are working on this one, but we cannot lean on China in order to offset this American challenge. It is simply not possible. Different size, different market access, everything is different. And also tell the Chinese, you cannot substitute the Americans for us. Market size 4 or 5 times bigger as exporters and investment. Again, we invested in 2021 as much in Texas as we did in China. So leave me alone. Don't mention that we have a choice between America and China. Again, for Europeans, it's not a choice. It's sort of, we want to be in both markets, but it has to be fair and square. And it seems like that both partners are going into a different direction.
So as the president of China-Europe Chamber of Commerce, where does that leave you for the Mittelstands? You have 90, and for your own firm, for instance, you have 90,000 customers, and around, I guess, 70,000 of them are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers to other industries. When you have to make that shift because of IRA and gas and energy prices, where does that leave the economic employment body of Europe at large, you know? So how is the employment going to play out in this, and where will that leave the body of workers in Europe? Does that keep you awake at night?
Well, definitely it keeps my bosses back home in Germany awake at night. I think that we have a situation where, again, we have to look at the source of all of that. Are we competitive? Are we innovative? Are we overregulated? Are we burying our innovative part of the economy with bureaucracy? That's what I sense has happening again and again. Finding 2 bureaucratic solutions for 1 economic problem is simply not going to swing the needle. So are we able to actually rejuvenate our continent, our old continent, with a stronger focus on science, on biology and chemistry, In the basic school, in the primary school, in the secondary school, we have dropped this ball. And I can see how my kids here grow up in China in an American Chinese environment, basically iPad and everything is IT, and then I see what they're doing in German schools. It's just pitiful. You know, we used to be the innovation machine, particularly on the SMEs, and in many ways we still are. If you look into what, for example, companies like Trump and Zeiss can do, which supply into ASML, the Dutch superstar, you can see we're very good at this still. I mean, BioNTech is a German company from my home region that found the solution to it. So we should not sort of fall into despair, but we definitely have to go to the root of this. We have to cut down on bureaucracy, improve our schooling system. If we don't do this, we're really toast.
Which is very interesting observation, because of course the dastardly Brexiteers were arguing exactly this, that once United Kingdom leaves the European Union, it will free the shackles of bureaucracy from Brussels. And yet look at the state that we are in compared to the rest of the continent, where there are no benefits, as far as I can see, to Brexit, materially,
Yes.
economically, culturally, and politically. So
yes,
you would have thought that Brussels would look at this and say, you know, guys, maybe they had something in Brexit, and that was we need to reduce the burden on innovators, whether in the public or the
right.
private sector. Are those lessons learned from the disaster of Brexit?
Well, you know, yesterday I watched with my kids, 3 boys, 11, 12, 14, Jeremy Clarkson and the farm, Diddley Squad farm. You know, the way how he gets an onslaught, bureaucratic onslaught from his village, from the council there. He wants to create job. He wants to get engaged. He wants to have a local community that contributes. And for them, it's sort of like there's a media superstar. Let's make his life hell. And then he has this thing. He wants to build something within 2 days, a restaurant, you know, creating jobs and local added value. And then he says, oh my God, Brexit, I need my Poles, I need my Lithuanians, you know. That's exactly, I think Britain gradually wakes up to the fact that they have shot themselves into the knee massively. Even I think Jeremy Clarkson was for Brexit. So again, do we have to wait for Britain to do this? But his example was beautiful, how an inward-looking kind of, I don't want to change anything. Local community burdens an innovator, an entrepreneur with totally unnecessary regulations. And that is across the whole region of Europe. I have this in my own village in southwest Germany, where they excel in making my life difficult sometimes on an adjacent grounds that we have. So in a way, we have to wake up to the fact that the Chinese are not waiting for us. The Americans are not waiting for us to sort ourselves out.
Very interesting. We couldn't get, how do you say, more excited for having you with us. I normally bring our sessions to a close with 2 simple questions. And who better to answer that than somebody who's living there for the past 4 decades, who has seen at least 4 different Chinas in these 4 decades. What is your single most important advice to your European fellow colleagues or people around the world, to the cinephobes and cinephiles? If you were to leave those 2 groups with one piece of advice, Jörg, what would that be?
Well, as the Chinese say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Just listen more. Just try to figure it out, what basically the society, the state leaders, the economy is going to tell you. And I think have your facts right. Again, you have to dig into numbers in order to see that. Stay open. And yes, there are discrepancies. Don't live in denial that China is a wonderful partner, democratic, and so forth. China has robust, selfish schemes that we have to identify. But China, again, is no juggernaut. So in a way, you find yourself by trying to have a sober view at this country. You have to have humility, a great respect. At the same time, you have to be very clairvoyant in order not to fall track to the fact that China might be luring you. So in a way, I think I managed quite well in order to have a clear view on this country. That gives me the opportunity to criticize as much as I want, because I've never lost the faith that China can do better. I'm a child of the Zhongji area. and critical statements from my side are very often perceived to be unnecessary and unfriendly. At the same time, if you don't pinpoint where the shortcomings are, how can you fix it? Junji is my role model. He always thought like this. He was the most critical person I came across. And again, we should go back there. And that's why I haven't given up on China's future.
Jörg, our 4 ears and 4 eyes have been glued to you in the course of this conversation. Totally enlightening. And also the way in which you've talked about the tensions between relations, but also the way in which we continue to project our own prejudices about China rather than seeing what is in front of us is really, truly enlightening. And I hope that our viewers understand that they need to be much more subtle in their evaluation analysis of China. And to be fair, I also expect that our correspondents who cover China also take a step back from the milieu of geopolitical interplay and try and understand and protect China. We have many Chinese students at Durham University, and I have to tell you, it is an utter pleasure to interact with them because they open all these windows onto life in China, and it's all glorious, it's all interesting, and so on. So I hope that our viewers understand the message that you're getting across to us, but also the people who are in charge of decisions understand that they need to drop some of the baggage that they're carrying and lighten themselves to get a much closer, intimate understanding of one and the other. As you say, the world we are entering now is a less of a happy place than it would have been before COVID, and certainly before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But you've also given us hope that there are opportunities to be explored, not for one side or the other, but for all parties to enjoy. And I hope that our viewers understand that message that you put across, because nobody can do it better than somebody who spent much of his life sitting in China while being very aware of his Western European roots. So we are really grateful to you for giving time to us, but also being so frank and open and insightful as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.